This film spent 10 years in production hell and was considered cursed, as dozens of filmmakers were unable to start shooting it. And yet, the movie not only made it to the big screen, but also won the hearts of audiences and the praise of critics, spawning a successful franchise and influencing the development of the action genre and cinema as a whole. Movies Inside Out presents Rambo: First Blood is a 1982 action thriller that tells the story of Vietnam War veteran John Rambo, who struggles to find his place in civilian life but faces injustice and humiliation at the hands of the police. How are apples and poetry connected to the main character's last name? Why did the ending of the movie have to be reshot at the last minute? And which actor does Stallone believe could become the new Rambo? We'll tell you all this and more in our new video.
All right, hurry it up. It's time for my coffee break.
The creation story. The story of the film Rambo: First Blood began in 1972, when Lawrence Turman of Columbia Pictures purchased the rights to adapt David Morrell's recently released novel, First Blood. Richard Brooks was slated to direct, and filming was scheduled for the end of 1972. However, the movie was never made because the producers decided to wait until the Vietnam War had ended. In 1976, John Calley of Warner Brothers Pictures acquired the rights to First Blood. He envisioned Robert De Niro or Clint Eastwood in the lead role. Walter Newman and David Rabe were tasked with writing the script, while directors such as Martin Ritt, Sidney Pollack, Martin Bregman, and Mike Nichols were considered to helm the project. However, the film's development was once again put on hold. A new version of the script was written by William Sackheim and Michael Kozol in 1977, and producer Carter DeHaven purchased it. Interestingly, in this version, unlike in the original novel, Rambo survived at the end. John Frankenheimer was set to direct, but production stalled yet again, this time due to financial issues. For several years, nobody thought about adapting First Blood, until the success of films like The Deer Hunter and Apocalypse Now reignited interest in the project. In 1981, Mario Kassar and Andrew G. Vina of Anabasis Investments became interested in the Rambo story. They planned to make the film the first project for their new studio, Carolco Pictures, and bought the adaptation rights from Warner Brothers, as well as the script by Sackheim and Kozol. George Miller, who had just released Mad Max 2, was originally slated to direct, but declined. Ultimately, Ted Kotcheff joined the project, having been involved in the development of First Blood back in the mid-70s. It was Kotcheff who offered the role of Rambo to Sylvester Stallone, who had gained fame with the Rocky films. Stallone immediately agreed, despite the movie's reputation for being cursed due to its many production delays. Thanks to Stallone, who saw the potential in First Blood, production finally moved forward. Sylvester was eager to take on another significant role beyond the wildly popular Rocky character, though he was initially hesitant about Rambo's madness and violence. Ultimately, Stallone chose to portray his character not as the psychopathic killer from the book, but as a confused man and a victim of circumstance. The actor also insisted that Rambo survive in the film, unlike in the original novel. Sylvester made 7 revisions to the new script, which was later refined by Larry Gross and David Giler. Interestingly, between 18 and 26 drafts of the screenplay were written before the final version was completed. By the way, the last name Rambo was created by David Morrell under rather unique circumstances. When he first started writing the book, his wife brought home some incredibly delicious apples. Morrell immediately asked what variety they were and found out they were called Rambo, which, translated from Swedish, means Raven's Hill. The author thought this name would be perfect for his main character, whose military code name became Raven. Additionally, Morrell recalled the French poet Arthur Rimbaud and his famous collection A Season in Hell, which he found to be an apt metaphor for Rambo's suffering. Casting. In the early stages of production, several actors were considered for the role of Rambo, in addition to De Niro and Eastwood. These included Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, James Caan, Chris Christopherson, Burt Reynolds, Robert Redford, John Travolta, Powers Booth, Michael Douglas, Nick Nolte, Brad Davis, and Dustin Hoffman. Interestingly, David Rabe wrote the script with Al Pacino in mind, but Pacino turned down the role, feeling the film was too dark. He also requested that Rambo be portrayed as insane, which the creators rejected. As for the role of Sheriff Teasel, early contenders were Burt Lancaster, Lee Marvin, Robert Mitchum, and Charles Durning. Kasser and Vina offered the role to Gene Hackman, Robert Duvall, and Ray Liotta, but all of them declined. The part ultimately went to Brian Dennehy, who was Ted Kotcheff's top choice.
You're facing the ass end of a 90-day incarceration, plus a $250 fine.
Despite this, Dennehy turned down the role 3 times, but each time he was offered a higher salary, which eventually convinced him to join the project. After Dennehy's passing in 2020, Sylvester Stallone paid tribute to him, crediting him as the inspiration for his portrayal of Rambo, as Dennehy had served in the Marine Corps in the 1960s. Colonel Troutman was initially considered for actors like Lee Marvin, James Mason, and Richard Jekyll. Kirk Douglas was cast for the role, but he left the project a day before filming began due to disagreements with the creators. Douglas wanted to retain the original ending, in which Rambo and Teasel fatally wound each other, and he also requested more screen time for Troutman. The producers rejected these ideas. Rock Hudson was considered to replace Douglas, but he was recovering from surgery and had to decline. The role ultimately went to Richard Crenna, who initially asked for assistance with his lines, as there wasn't enough time for him to learn them. Notably, Crenna also had a military background, having served in the US Army during World War II. Interestingly, Burt Reynolds later mentioned that he would have gladly played Troutman if he had been offered the role since he really liked the character. However, Stallone claimed that at the time, Reynolds was such a big star that he wouldn't have dared offer him a supporting role. Bill McKinney took on the role of Captain Kern.
Just finish up what you're doing.
While Sergeant Galt was portrayed by Jack Starrett.
I swear to God, I will kill you.
And David Caruso played Mitch.
There were 3 of us on him in the cell block down there. He went through us like we weren't even there.
Once the cast was finally assembled, the crew headed to Canada, which was chosen as the filming location for budgetary reasons. The filming process. The filming of First Blood lasted from November 1981 to April 1982 and took place in British Columbia, in the Fraser Valley, Coquihalla Canyon Park, Golden Ears Park, as well as near the Capilano River and Pitt Lake. Interestingly, while the movie takes place in the fictional town of Hope, Washington, a significant portion of it was actually filmed in the real town of Hope in British Columbia. In fact, Hope regularly hosts tours of the film's locations. Unfortunately, one of these locations, the bridge where Teasel arrests John Rambo, was demolished in 2011. Many fans visited the town to take pictures and walk across the bridge one last time. In 2020, a massive wooden statue of Rambo was erected in Hope to honor the film's legacy. An interesting rule on set required that no one stray more than 50 feet from the rest of the crew. The terrain was very uniform, and the weather was unpredictable, making it easy to get lost. At all the chosen locations, unexpectedly sunny weather posed challenges, as it didn't match the grim tone of the film. Despite the bright sky, the Canadian forests were extremely cold, and Stallone, wearing light clothing, narrowly avoided getting sick. The filming was also delayed multiple times due to unforeseen circumstances. In January 1982, production was postponed for 2 months due to heavy snowfalls, and other breaks were caused by actor injuries. Speaking of injuries, Stallone, who didn't use stunt doubles, seriously injured his back after 19 takes of the scene where Rambo is beaten with a baton in the police station. He also broke several ribs while performing the stunt where Rambo falls from a cliff into a tree. Brian Dennehy wasn't spared either. During the scene where Teasel crashes through the glass ceiling of the police station, he injured his ribs. While filming the prison escape scene, Stallone accidentally broke Alf Humphreys' nose, who played Lester, by elbowing him in the face. Interestingly, in the novel, Rambo does the same thing to a policeman under similar circumstances. During the motorcycle chase scene where the police pursue Rambo, the stuntman portraying Sheriff Teasel suffered a compression fracture of his lower back. In the first take, which was filmed at speeds exceeding 60 miles per hour, the car was launched into the air, and after landing, the stuntman couldn't stand up. The scene was later reshot with a more realistic jump, using a different stuntman. Other issues also arose during filming. At one point, a truck loaded with firearms worth over $50,000 was stolen from the set and was never recovered. Even though the guns were modified to fire blanks, Canadian police warned that they could still be converted into live weapons. Following this incident, the filming locations were guarded by the Canadian Army, whose soldiers also appeared in the film as extras. Some scenes in the finished movie were not in the script and were added during filming. For example, the piece of tarp that Rambo uses to make an improvised poncho wasn't a prop. It was actually found in the woods by the crew and carefully preserved since there was no replacement. After filming ended, Stallone took the tarp as a keepsake and still owns it. The end of the chase, where Teasel's car flips upside down, wasn't scripted either, but Kachev liked the result so much that he asked Brian Dennehy to get back into the car and film the scene as it appears in the final cut. The famous knife Rambo uses in the film was designed and created by renowned knife maker Jimmy Lyle, who was hired by Stallone himself. The knife had to be reliable in extreme conditions, long and sharp enough to cut wood, and feature a waterproof handle for storing essential survival items. 6 identical knives were used during the filming, though in the original novel, this iconic weapon is never mentioned. By the way, this isn't the only difference from the original source material. For instance, the name John was introduced in the film by Sylvester Stallone. In the book, the character is simply referred to as Rambo. In the novel, Troutman is a captain, and unlike the film where he and Rambo have a good relationship, Rambo barely remembers him. Another key detail from the novel that didn't make it into the film is the reason for Teasel's disdain for Rambo. In the book, the animosity stems from the fact that Rambo was a Vietnam War veteran, a conflict that garnered significant attention, while Teasel had fought in the Korean War, which by then had largely been forgotten. In the book, Rambo kills Galt by slashing his stomach with a razor, but the filmmakers deemed this too brutal and replaced it with Galt's fall from the helicopter. Notably, in the film, Rambo doesn't kill anyone, only seriously injuring them.
Dobby never meant to kill. Dobby only meant to maim or seriously injure.
Whereas in the novel, he kills around 20 police officers and National Guardsmen. In the book, the cave that Rambo hides in is filled with bats, but in the movie, these were replaced by rats. According to Stallone, the rats became quite aggressive in the cold water, and he had to get a tetanus shot due to the numerous bites and scratches he sustained. A representative from the Animal Protection Service who was present on set noted that many rats were harmed during and between takes. Some were even killed just for fun. Unfortunately, she couldn't intervene because the rats were laboratory bred, though painted gray, and belonged to the production company. Stallone also wanted to film a scene where Rambo kills a large animal, like a boar or lynx, but the producers talked him out of it, fearing backlash from animal rights activists. As a result, the hunting scene made it into the movie, but the actual kill was left off screen. To test how realistic his arm wound looked, Stallone, while still in makeup, went to a local hospital during a lunch break, and the nurses actually believed the injury was real. Stallone also recalled that once, in a local bar, a woman pretended to be a fan just to trick him into buying her a drink. This incident stuck with him so much that he decided to include a similar scene in his film Rocky Balboa, which was released in 2006. Interestingly, all the National Guardsmen chasing Rambo in the mine share the same names as the actors who portray them. The only exception is Lieutenant Clinton Morgan, who was played by Patrick Stack. Additionally, the names of Rambo's comrades from Vietnam are actually the names of members of the film's crew. In the DVD commentary, Stallone compares Rambo to Dr. Frankenstein's monster and Colonel Troutman to Dr. Frankenstein himself. The actor explains that Rambo is a creation of the American war machine, a monster built to follow orders, who escapes and tries to integrate into a society that rejects him. Troutman, feeling responsible for turning Rambo into what he's become, tries to fix the situation. In the final scene, Rambo tells Troutman a story about a fellow soldier who was blown up by a bomb hidden in a shoeshine box. This incident is based on a true story, as recounted to Stallone by a Vietnam War veteran who had experienced a similar event. Movie mistakes and errors. Now let's count the major mistakes and errors made by the creators of First Blood. The year of Hope's founding is shown as 1858 on the left side of the sign, and 1958 on the right. Teasel asks John which direction he's heading, and Rambo replies that he's going north. However, during the drive, Rambo says he needs to get to Portland. Teasel points out that Portland is south, not north, but later drops Rambo off, saying Portland is straight ahead. Yet Teasel had been driving north, meaning Portland would be in the opposite direction. There's heavy rain outside, but Teasel's windshield remains completely dry. Additionally, the rearview mirror, which was in place a few minutes ago, mysteriously disappears. Police cars usually have a partition between the front and back seats, but there's none in Teasel's car. In a flashback, a Vietnamese soldier speaks Cantonese, not Vietnamese. The rearview mirror in Teasel's car reappears, but then vanishes again in an interior shot. A signal light cover falls off after an impact, but moments later, it's back in place. At the same time, the car loses its rear hubcap, but it's visible again shortly afterward. In a close-up, Rambo's face is clean-shaven, even though he didn't have time to shave at the police station. As it is typical in films, characters have normal conversations inside a helicopter without wearing headsets, despite the deafening noise. When John throws a rock at the helicopter's windshield, you can see a predetermined spot where the cracks will form, and the rock doesn't even hit that spot. When Galt falls out of the helicopter, you can see that a slimmer stuntman with darker hair and different shoes takes his place. Galt was holding a rifle, which isn't visible as he falls, but Rambo later finds it and takes it for himself. When John lifts Galt's already dead body, you can see his breath forming condensation, indicating he's still breathing. Colonel Troutman wears the U.S. Army Special Forces insignia on his beret, although he should be wearing a silver eagle, which represents his rank. This mistake was corrected in the sequels. In the forest, you can hear crickets, but the movie is set in December, when crickets wouldn't be present. The radio John uses is an FM device, which only works within the line of sight, meaning it shouldn't function inside the cave. John is almost fully submerged in water, but seconds later, he removes his loincloth and wraps it around his torch, even though it should be wet and unsuitable for this. Lester ends up with a broken nose and arm, even though Rambo only hit him in the face and didn't touch his arm. A police car hits a vehicle on the roadside, which inexplicably explodes. During the explosion, you can even spot the cables holding the car in place. The bridge where the police set up a roadblock shows its height in meters, but in the US, it should be listed in feet. After Rambo drives through the police cars, the truck's fuel tank and several items fly out onto the road. However, in the next shot, nothing is visible on the road. Additionally, the tailgate swings open from the impact, but later, John opens it again, and somehow a machine gun appears in the truck bed. One of the signs labeled Turbo features a Canadian maple leaf. Throughout the movie, none of the rifles or machine guns ejects shell casings when fired, and there's no recoil. Moreover, Rambo's sideburns constantly change shape and length. Have you ever noticed any of these mistakes when watching the movie? Deleted scenes. The first rough cut of First Blood was about 3.5 hours long. According to Stallone, it was so bad that he wanted to buy the film and destroy it, believing it would ruin his career. Of course, the studio didn't allow him to do that, and instead, the creators trimmed it down to 93 minutes, the version that was eventually released in theaters. However, some of the nearly 2 hours of deleted scenes are available to audiences. Certain TV releases include new scenes that were cut from the theatrical version, such as a conflict between Teasle and Mitch, a scene at the field headquarters where Galt's widow cries and Lester comforts her, an extended conversation between Teasle and Kern about Rambo's arrest, several extended dialogues between Troutman and Teasle, an extended scene of Rambo trying to find a way out of the mine, a scene in the mine where John remembers an evening in a Vietnamese bar and the girl he spent the night with, a few more Vietnam flashback episodes, a bar scene where Teasle and Troutman shake hands. There are also reports of other scenes, including Rambo entering a local diner to buy takeout food, but the cashiers refuse to serve him, paramedics loading injured soldiers into ambulances while Galt's body is taken into a helicopter, Teasle and Troutman landing at the site where Rambo is supposedly killed, and Teasle being congratulated for killing him. One notable change for TV broadcasts was the removal of the scene where Rambo stitches up his arm wound. Instead, a moment was added where John checks Galt's rifle for ammunition. Additionally, the creators had to change the ending at the last minute. Although Stallone had always intended for Rambo to survive, Ted Kotcheff decided to shoot a version in which the character dies. In this version, Rambo places a gun in Troutman's hand, pointing it at himself, and says it's better to die than go to prison. Troutman hesitates, and John grabs his hand, causing the gun to fire into his stomach. However, during a test screening of the finished film, the director realized that audiences didn't like this ending, so it was reshot. Other alternate endings were also considered, in which Rambo dies. In one, Troutman shoots Rambo as he's about to kill Teasle, and in another, John opens fire on the police, who then shoot him in return. Interestingly, Stallone later admitted that First Blood is his favorite film in the entire franchise, and he wouldn't change anything about it now.
Sometimes I wake up and I don't know where I am. I don't talk to anybody.
Would you like to see the full version of First Blood, or are you satisfied with the final cut? Worldwide recognition. The premiere of Rambo First Blood took place on October 22, 1982. With a budget of $15 million, the film grossed $47,200,000 in the US, topping the box office for 3 consecutive weeks, and an additional $78 million internationally, for a total of $125,200,000 worldwide. For his role, Stallone initially asked for $3.5 million, but the producers offered him $2 million as his base salary. He earned the remaining $1.5 million through TV sales, ultimately bringing his earnings for the film to around $7 million. Interestingly, the film's original budget was only $11 million, but it grew by $4 million due to production delays. To offset the additional costs, the filmmakers reduced Richard Crenna's role to lower his fee and cover some unexpected expenses. However, the bulk of the missing funds were borrowed with the expectation of selling distribution rights before the premiere, a gamble that paid off handsomely. Rambo became the first Hollywood blockbuster to be released in China. It was screened there in 1985 and held the record for the highest ticket sales until 2018. The movie also enjoyed massive success in Turkey, staying on screens in Istanbul for more than 50 weeks. Additionally, First Blood was the first film starring Stallone to achieve box office success outside of the Rocky series. Despite the film's popularity, some viewers criticized Stallone for allegedly dodging the draft during the Vietnam War by leaving the US, claiming that he didn't have the moral right to portray a veteran. The film received generally positive reviews from critics, who praised the performances of Stallone, Crenna, and Dennehy. Some critics commended the film for its energy and inventiveness, while others found it chaotic, criticizing its implausibility and unclear ending. Interestingly, David Morrell, the author of the novel First Blood, admitted that he liked the movie adaptation even more than his own book. While Rambo didn't receive many major film awards, it was nominated for the German Jupiter Award in the category of Best International Film, and Stallone won the award for Best Actor for his roles in First Blood and Rocky III. Shortly after the premiere, Carolco Pictures began developing a sequel. The second film, Rambo First Blood Part 2, 1985, along with subsequent sequels, received far worse reviews than the first film. However, each installment was financially successful enough to justify further entries. Rambo 3 was released in 1988, Rambo 4 in 2008, and Rambo Last Blood in 2019. In 1986, an animated series titled Rambo: The Force of Freedom was also released. The franchise expanded further with video games, comics, and novels. Stallone co-wrote the scripts for all 5 films and directed the 4th installment. In 2019, Stallone announced the development of a prequel intended to explore John Rambo's early years in Vietnam. While this story was ultimately told in the graphic novel First Kill, the creators have not abandoned the idea of a full-fledged prequel. In 2022, Stallone revealed that a series about Rambo's past was still in development. Stallone once mentioned that if the Rambo franchise were ever rebooted, he would want Ryan Gosling to play the lead role. This choice wasn't random. Gosling once said that First Blood left a huge impression on him as a child, and he spent a long time imitating Stallone's character. Rambo First Blood had a profound impact on cinema and continues to do so today. The film inspired many of the major action movies of the 1980s and helped pave the way for more realistic and relatable action heroes like John McClane from Die Hard.
Clay in the 3rd grade. My friends call me John. You're neither, shithead.
Even franchises like John Wick and various action films starring Liam Neeson still feel the influence of First Blood. After Rambo, many action films emerged about former soldiers struggling to leave their past behind, such as Universal Soldier, Jack Reacher, and Soldier. The film also popularized the portrayal of the traumatized war veteran in other genres. The massive success of Rambo paved the way for more dramatic films like Jacob's Ladder, Born on the 4th of July, and American Sniper. Interestingly, Rambo even inspired Chris Rea's song Driving Home for Christmas.
Driving home for Christmas, yeah.
Of course, First Blood also cemented the image of the uncompromising yet just hero, a trait that can be traced throughout Stallone's work and has endeared him to generations of viewers. Are you looking forward to new stories about this iconic character, or do you prefer revisiting the classic?